Start spreading your studs before separating the plates. As you spread the studs, walk backwards and place the studs near the X's on the wall plates. Do not spend too much time trying to make them perfect. It's only important that you make sure that you have enough studs to build the wall. Once all the studs are spread, you can separate the top plate from the bottom plate. Start on one end of the wall. In this case, the wall has a corner partition, so you will want to make that before you nail the studs through the bottom plate. Corners should have one nail every 18 inches. And in this case, I have a double corner, so you'll want to make the corner first before setting the double stud on top, rather than making the double stud first and then trying to toenail the corner onto the wall. Building it this way creates a much stronger connection for the wall. For 2x6 walls, you want 3 nails through the bottom plate into each stud, as well as into the top plate, which you'll see later on. Crowning your studs, even on exterior walls, is important, as bows, severe bows in the studs can result in issues later on for the drywaller. So make sure you have the crown always facing up for all studs. What I'm doing here is I have 2 studs that are nailed together, and I put the bows reverse of each other. That way, when you start fastening them together, nailing from the bottom first, nice and flush, and then go to the middle, make it nice and flush, and then you can work your way to the top, which is what I had to do there, is put a toenail and drive the studs together so that they're nice and flush. And that way the 2 opposite bows will then create a straight double stud. As you're nailing the studs into the wall through the bottom plate, you want to remember to make sure that the stud is flush with the top of the plate. Put 1 nail into the bottom of the stud, and then remove your hand, and then 1 nail into the middle of the stud, and then 1 nail through the plate into the top of near the top of the stud. This way you reduce all risk of shooting yourself in the finger or in the hand. Another thing to note is that you can see that I'm walking forwards as I'm building the wall. You don't want to be walking backwards because obvious reasons for potential tripping as you're trying to walk backwards, plus walking forwards just makes things, everything a lot easier. Here I'm making a wall partition, so I'm using a 2x4 as the plate was laid out. Sometimes it'll be 2x6 or sometimes 2x4. When you're building exterior walls, you can see that there's going to be a gap between the corner I built for the wall partition, about a 2-inch gap, so that later on insulators can stuff insulation in behind the corner partition, and that way it doesn't leave a dry pocket for rot, and it's also properly insulated. Now that you have all of these studs nailed through the bottom plate, you can proceed with the top. Again, working from the end so that you're always walking forwards and not backwards. Another tip I would like to mention is that when you're building walls or doing anything with a pneumatic nailer, never ever keep your finger on the trigger, because if you keep your finger on the trigger, you greatly increase your risk of shooting yourself with a nail, either in the hand, the arm, the leg, or even the foot. As you're nailing, if you notice that the plate is twisting a little bit, make sure to use your hammer and hammer the plate tight so that the plate is tight to the top of all the studs and that there's no gaps. Now, if you have a window in the wall, you can make the header. Make sure that the header is flush on both ends and 3 nails on each end, as well as 3 nails every 16 inches. Now you want to make the header flush with the top plate and put 2 nails through the top plate every 16 inches. When you nail through the king stud into the header, there should be 3 nails for 2x10 headers in each ply of the header. In 2x12 headers, should be 4 nails in each ply. And for paralams, it should be 6 nails on each side. Now you can take your jack stud measurement, measuring from the bottom plate to the underside of the header. The reason why you want to install your header first before cutting the jack studs is because sometimes the headers are different depths. Sometimes they're not always 9 1/4, sometimes they're 9 1/2. So taking this measurement after your header is installed is always best, so that way you get the jack studs to be perfectly tight and flush underneath your header, giving it full support. Here you see me checking the stud, making sure that the waned edge is always facing in around windows. The reason why you want to hide the waned edges is because it makes it much easier for drywallers to finish around the windows later on. And it also makes your framing look a lot cleaner. When nailing jack studs to the cripple studs, it's also just like a bearing point as well. So you need 2 nails every 16 inches, and that's usually the minimum. But you can also check with your supervisor if the nailing pattern might be different. Now that you have your jack studs in place, you can set your window plate, of course making it flush with the top of each side of the studs and as well as the header. For this, you can put 2 nails every about 18 inches, but 2 nails in on each end. Next, measure the depth of your window. This you'll want to check with your supervisor to make sure that you have the correct measurement. Now that you know the size of your window, you can account for your bottom sill plate and then take your measurement for your cripple studs. Here I'm cutting my cripple studs and we'll set them first before setting my bottom sill plate for my window. Here you'll see a trick that I just set the bottom sill plate flush with the bottom sill plate and mark out my cripple studs rather than having to try and measure them out after. That way this saves time when you go to nail the top here of your bottom sill plate. Now that all of your studs are nailed and your windows are finished, you can measure your double top plate, of course leaving the appropriate gap for the wall partitions. Always give about a 1/4 inch extra to each side of the wall partitions and on the ends where there's corners. That way when you go to stand your interior walls later on that connect to the wall, you don't have to worry about um, the double top plate overlap not fitting, or if the wall is slightly out of level, you have a little bit of room for play there. When nailing the double top plate, make sure you set the one end first, put 2 nails to fasten it, then move to the middle, make sure it's nice and flush, and then put 2 nails as well, and then go to the opposite end, and again 2 nails. When you nail your double top plate, you want 2 nails above every stud. The reason for this is that you don't want to put 2 nails in the spaces between the studs, because when ventilation guys or plumbers go through the building later on, and electricians, they will tend to drill or cut in between the studs. And if you have nails there, sometimes their drill or their chainsaws will hit those studs, or will hit those nails, and it's of course not a good feeling. So try and do your best to respect the other trades and keep your nails above your studs as much as possible. Now that the framing of the wall is complete, you want to square the wall before sheathing it. The reason for this is if you don't square it before sheathing it, your sheets probably won't line up properly on your studs, as well as once you have the wall sheathed, it'll be permanently held out of level from side to side, which will create many other issues for the next floor above or the roof above. So always make sure that you square your wall. So here I'm doing it by myself. So after every adjustment, I want to just double check that the wall is perfectly square. This tends to be a lot easier with two people when you square the wall. It's much faster. But just for this video, I'm by myself. So that way, if you're ever working by yourself, you know the proper way to square your wall. Now that the wall is built and square, you will begin to sheath it. Start with the corner of the wall from which the stud layout started. Flush the sheet with the bottom plate of the wall. Set one 2-inch nail on the bottom of the sheet, then go to the opposite side, and in this case, you want to flush the sheet with the bottom plate and the exterior stud, then set a nail. Then go to the top of the sheet and set one more nail just to hold the sheet in place. Now you can begin nailing with the coil nailer. As you nail, remember to be careful not to pull the hose into the area in which you are nailing, and as well, never keep your finger on the trigger. Completely nail each sheet of plywood to the wall as you set them. This way it ensures you do not miss any studs, as well as not using a mass amount of air, as it will nailing multiple plywood sheets in one go. Being mindful of your coworkers' use of air when building walls is important. If you use all of the air in the reservoir tank at the end when you are nailing all of the sheets off, it can leave your coworkers without any air, causing delays in their framing. You can see here I'm holding the hose behind me, kind of just guiding it and keeping it out of the way of my path of nailing. Make sure to mark out your window locations as you sheath. You can choose to cut them out as you sheath or cut them out at the end when you are completely finished the sheathing process. As you cut, make sure that you're aware of where the cord is or any hoses nearby so that they do not get pulled into the path of your cut. Whenever making cuts off the floor, always be aware of which is the best way to cut and the safest way. A note to remember when cutting your end pieces, try to make the sheet so that the factory edge will be up against another factory edge whenever possible. This makes good practice for clean framing. In some cases, you can rely on just laying the sheet over top and just using a scribing line to mark out the remaining of the sheet. When nailing the edges of the plywood that land on the center of a stud, don't forget to angle the gun slightly. This helps reduce nails missing the stud, as you only have 3/4 of an inch for the nail to hit. And then finish cutting out your windows. And when you finish nailing the wall off around all of your window edges, it's always good to go back over top of the wall and just make sure that all the studs are nailed.